people in these high conflict, weaponized divorces haven't really worked through their emotional issues. There's a lot of pain, and they're just projecting it onto the other side. And they have an attorney who advocates for that. If your ex is in this weaponized divorce, they may be willing to spend more on the problem than on the resolution. They may be willing to spend $10,000, even though it would cost only $5,000 to solve it. If you see that, you may be in one of these high conflict divorces because it's not really about what you think's going on. Welcome to Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. This is Corey Shapiro. The goal of this podcast is to help you make better choices now for your kids tomorrow. In this episode, we're going to focus on how to spot the difference between a difficult divorce, a painful divorce, and one that's weaponized. Some might say high conflict, because the earlier you can spot that, the better you're going to be. So let me tell you a little story I heard from a colleague. He told me about this divorce that was ongoing for years with a little child, and they had one, seemed like a simple issue. So the child's grandparent was dying. This client wanted their child to travel overseas where this grandparent was and see them before they died, right? It seems reasonable request. But the other side objected. They said, they're going to abscond with the child, never bring the child back. And it was a whole big thing, even though there was never any evidence of any of that. And the person had roots here. So they go to court and the judge, saw through it too. But then the other side's like, you know what? We'll just enter a stipulation. We'll agree to this. We'll just do a stipulation to set out the terms because there's some issues we want to deal with, but I don't think this is going to be a problem. And the other side thought that was the end. What they didn't realize was that negotiation of the stipulation was drawn out for so long, over a month, that during that period of time, the grandparent died and the child never saw that grandparent. Okay, now that's a high conflict, weaponized divorce. Let me put my lawyer hat on here to tell you what's going on. It's almost like you can't solve a problem with someone who needs a problem. And a lot of times people in these high conflict, weaponized divorces haven't really worked through their emotional issues. There's a lot of pain, and they're just projecting it onto the other side. And they have an attorney who advocates for that. So let me give you a 5-step framework to think about this so you can spot this earlier, so you don't have to waste your money, trying to negotiate something that's never going to be resolved, like unfortunately that person did. And the first thing I want you to realize, if your ex is in this weaponized divorce, they may be willing to spend more on the problem than on the resolution. They may be willing to spend $10,000, even though it would cost only $5,000 to solve it. If you see that, you may be in one of these high conflict divorces because it's not really about what you think's going on. Something's underneath that's unresolved, like a wound that's been festering. The second thing I want you to realize is they won't solve the problem. Now, here's how they do it. Just like in that little story I shared to you, they will say they are moving forward, but they're not really moving forward. It's almost like in business, the check's in the mail. Once a check is cleared, that's when you think a check is resolved, not when someone says the check is in the mail. That was an old phrase. The third thing I want you to think about is they're going to weaponize your emotions. And let me give you an example of this. This is something that's important to you, not important to them. And then they're going to prey on you. So for example, let's say they've never been on a trip with your child because they never wanted to have that responsibility. All of a sudden in a divorce, they want to go a week away to California alone. They never did that. They're doing that to destabilize you. They're weaponizing the emotion. They're also going to empty your resources. And remember, the resources are not just money. We know now there's 4 different subparts of resources or capacity. And, that's your emotion, your energy, your time, and money. So they're going to empty all of that. And that's where you get people who just spend so much time and energy on a divorce for no reason at all, really, because they're in such pain. And finally, everything is personal. No one really knows, I don't think, why things can't resolve, but there's such pain that it becomes almost impossible to untangle. Really difficult to untangle. So that's what I want you to think about. So my message to you is you can't solve a problem with someone who needs a problem. And I want you to spot these weaponized divorces early because I don't want you to spend so much time and resources trying to be rational and reasonable with these people. What you're trying to do is contain them. So let me give you an action step this week. Think about an issue you're working on. Let's say it's a parenting schedule. And let's say it's just a holiday schedule. And let's say a framework would be equal, that just split it equally. That's easy. But let's say they don't want equal. They want all of Christmas forever. Okay. And even though you both celebrate Christmas, that's an unreasonable position. It's not going to even hold up in court. So are they doing that? And this is a question I want you to ask. Are they doing that for progress or for punishment? And if they're doing it for progress, so like, for example, they take that position, they're going to have every Christmas, and you're like, okay, that's a little aggressive. Why don't we split it? We both want to share it. And they're like, you know what? You're right. Let's think about it a different way. If they start having concessions, that's when you can start moving into negotiation. But if they're just being difficult and polarized and what we call position polarization, that's when you have to move to containment. Okay, because this is not about anything other than punishment. And don't spend your resources trying to be reasonable with someone who needs this problem. Okay, and I know this is difficult, and I'm sorry if you're in a high conflict divorce. I'm sorry if you're in a weaponized divorce. But the earlier you can see this, the more you can contain it. And why is this important? Because we're trying to protect our resources. We're trying to protect our resources. And there comes a time where this person who acted out at some point in your case, and it might be years in the future, unfortunately, could be years. I want you to set this up. They may calm down, or the judge might get to them in a certain way. Or unfortunately, you may have to have a trial, or at least a pre-trial conference, or one day of trial. Don't think just because you go to trial, you're going to have like a 10-day trial. It could be a 10-day trial, but a lot of times on the first day of trial, things can be resolved. But the sad thing is, how much time, energy, money did you spend getting there? And that's why I want you to think about this earlier in the process. All right, I got you. I'm here to support you each week. And next episode, we're going to focus on boundaries. We're going to go deep dive into boundaries because it's so important in divorce because it's what we can control. I'm Corey Shapiro. Let's step forward with clarity together.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.